up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing High Strangeness Part 5. It seems my videos simply titled High Strangeness garner a lot of interest and attention from you guys, and so whenever I come across some things that I otherwise find hard to classify, I put this title on it because, I'm only calling it exactly what it is. Pure strangeness at the highest level, and that's exactly what we're going to be getting into today. These stories of high strangeness go along with alien abductions. Now, some might say that being abducted by aliens in general constitutes as high strangeness, but we on this channel, we don't freak out that easily. We don't make assumptions, right? So let's dust off those old tinfoil hats, sit underneath a clear sky, and mentally instruct UFOs on how to get to our homes or wherever we are. It's time for another edition of High Strangeness. Let's jump right in. This man has a plethora of highly strange material, and here though, I will only be giving you his greatest hits, so to speak. Let's let the man himself start it all off. Daryl said of one of his encounters, quote, approximately April or May 1945, an extremely bizarre encounter. I was playing in the backyard when I spotted a creature about my size, an elf perhaps, which communicated telepathically. It merged its body with mine and controlled my movements. We went out the back gate and down several streets to an area that at that time was still wild country. We found a hole in the ground and jumped in, falling a fair distance, stopped, and entered a strange room and walked down a corridor. The corridor led to a door which swung open, and the elf separated from me. There followed some kind of physical examination, then I was back in the yard quickly forgetting the whole incident. Long ago, I described the details to Bud Hopkins, and he said he had had many similar cases, end quote. It's not too unusual for it to be reported that some sort of fey being or creature does overtake the body of a human being, usually but not always a child, but to what end are questions answered differently in every single case. The fey are known for being pranksters and tricksters and are more likely, considering my own experience and in my own opinion, to overtake someone in this way than extraterrestrials are, because the aliens normally, let's face it, just kidnap you against your will if they need that badly to examine you or whatever it is they abduct people for, right? It's these types of reports that make me wonder about the possible connection between extraterrestrials and the Fae and anything else that comes and goes through portals and deals mostly in energy and fun times. So I've done a few videos, I believe at least 2 on the connection between extraterrestrials and fairies, and I am still researching for a part 3 because the information, guys, is literally massive, but more on that to come. Daryl also told of another experience. Quote, in 1948, my parents and I were driving at night on a deserted rural highway. An object came over and lifted the car into a big round room. A door opened and 3 creatures with clawed webbed toes and stubs for fingers took each of us in a different direction. I followed one down a long dark corridor to a brightly lit room with an examining table and a gray with long bony fingers. He stuck a sharp instrument into my stomach, then a different instrument far up my right nostril. When he pulled it out, my nose bled a little and was sore for hours. Then he took an instrument like a black cone and pressed the point to my forehead, producing a strange vibrating sensation. Apparently, he was activating an implant that had just been put in place. He said telepathically, quote, it'll be all right from now on, end quote. Abruptly, we were all back in the car and the whole episode was forgotten, end quote. This is also not very unusual if you're simply looking at the fact that the car itself and the entire family were abducted, and there was also some sort of implant activation, right? I've heard many times, it's not really the normal. Normally they'll just take the people out of the car somehow, but I have heard of cars being taken, and it always reminds me of like when you drive your car onto a ship or something, right? Technically that's what's happening, I guess. Again though, and as usual, I am super duper jelly. I don't know that this has never happened to me, but I currently have no memory of it. That, as we all should know by now, means nothing. Just because you don't remember something doesn't mean it didn't happen, especially when talking about UFOs and other high strangeness beings. Still in all though, I would love to have that memory, maybe one day. Daryl went on to say that while he couldn't remember the exact date, this next one was quite creepy indeed. Quote, I don't remember the date, but once I was confronted with a large insectoid which said, quote, I want you to devote your entire life to me, end quote. I didn't understand and asked what that meant. I don't remember what the creature said, but I replied emphatically, "No, I won't." This evidently did not go over very well, end quote. This one struck a very deep and terrifying chord within me. I've mentioned once or twice an experience I had which presented itself as a dream where I was lying underneath several similar looking beings to what Daryl had just described. They were reptilian/insectoid. They were holding me down in my bed. They were demanding the same thing of me, and while I can't remember what their threats were when I denied them and kept on resisting and fighting them to let go of me, I do remember screaming, almost pleading, and crying in anguish for them to please not do whatever it was they had threatened to do if I didn't comply. I screamed, "I already deal with seeing enough. Don't you know what my abilities are?" I have absolutely no idea, guys, but this encounter just brought the entire thing right back to me. What I don't like about it is how Daryl ends this with, "This evidently didn't go over very well." Then the quote ends, and that's the end of what he has to say about the encounter. So why didn't it go very well? What happened? As usual, and you guys know I hate this, and I'm getting to the point where I'm saying it in every single video, we're left with a cliffhanger to just wonder. Daryl gave another account of an abduction / some high strangeness and said, quote, "In January of 1950, I was taken at night from my home by skeletal creatures who said they were going to kill me. I begged for my life, reminding them of the time they had said, quote, 'It will be all right from now on,' end quote. So instead, they put me on a table and performed extensive procedures. Finally, they abandoned me, and all the memories were lost for very many years. As far as I can tell, I was never abducted again. When I first encountered flying saucers in the newspaper that March, I immediately adopted the subject as the center of my life, but it never occurred to me to wonder why, nor to suspect it had anything to do with me," end quote. I've come across, and I'm sure a lot of you guys who do research in this community have too, time and time again, people who are either deathly afraid of or are naturally drawn to everything extraterrestrial and UFO related, but have no idea or clue as to why, and mainly they take it as it's just an avid interest or hobby, something they just simply came across and got stuck on and love researching, right? That's normally what someone who is literally clueless, and I don't mean that as a judgment or an indictment, as you guys know, will say. It's just super interesting. I have no idea. It usually takes years or something triggering a memory for them to understand that there's a hidden place in their mind where wiped memories still live, and once they access it, even if only in fragments, they then begin to understand the implications of their little hobby. Let's also briefly cover, just for a sec, can we talk about it, what these things allegedly looked like? I find it very interesting that though these entities looked nothing like the ones Daryl described earlier, who he claimed gave him the implant and told him it'll all be all right from now on, he was still able to, in this state of dread, confusion, and panic, recognize that one did in fact have to do with another. Very interesting indeed, actually, at least in my own humble opinion, of course. Let me know what you all think in the comments below. All was seemingly quiet for our friend Daryl, at least as far as his memories served him, until 1986. It seems he hadn't yet somehow been visited by a man in black, but now was being approached by something even more terrible and ghastly, a woman in black of all things. He once again relayed the encounter himself by saying, quote, "In early June of 1986, don't recall the exact date, I was just coming from a discussion of my abduction memories and approaching the parking lot to drive home. A white-haired lady in dark or black clothes drove by in a dark or black car. As she approached me, she slowed down, leaned out of her window, and yelled at me, quote, 'You have 9 years until what you were made for. You have 9 more years,' end quote. Then she sped up and drove away. I didn't catch the license number, make of the car, any other details. But I distinctly remember what she yelled, since I spent the next 9 years haunted by what might be awaiting me in early June of 1995. When the date finally arrived, there were smells suggesting that things might have been in the house, but otherwise nothing happened. The literature is full of cases where predictions failed to come true. Maybe they just changed their minds," end quote. He's not wrong, and I've discussed this several times while discussing the MIB here with you guys on this channel, where the MIB make threats that never seem to be followed through with. It's so odd because I feel like in almost any other case, this would take at least some credibility away from what or whoever is making the threat that never comes true. I mean, over and over and over again, some sort of supernatural or possible extraterrestrial being or they could be as yet some unknown mix of both, repeatedly make terroristic and death threats, and yet the threats never ever seem to happen. This could, at least with what I've come to know through my extensive research and experience with supernatural entities, be because they are vampiric and live and feed off of and even lust after our fear, the fear of human beings. Stay with me here. Imagine the fear an individual might feel having been threatened in this way. I mean, she just basically bought herself 9 whole years where she will barely have to work to be fed, at least when it came to this one man. It's actually brilliant if you really think about it. Forcing someone into a constant and perpetual state of fear and dread for almost an entire decade when their very fear is how you live and survive. Were those smells suggestive of something being in the house, the woman in black or some other unseen entities and forces that were there, invisible, in order to feast on the heightened state as the last few days of when the threat was supposed to come through approached? I don't know for sure, but it does kind of make perfect sense to me. Let's move on from our buddy Daryl and see what other high strangeness is here for us. The following account was written for Nick Redfern for Mysterious Universe by a woman named Susan Shepard. Susan is someone I'll have to research further, as she is said to have written an account of an experience or encounter with the grinning man / Indrid Cold. For now, though, let's see what she had to say to Nick. It's titled A Life of High Strangeness and goes like this, quote, in late winter of 1967, a church bus was driving over Route 50 that then went directly through the small town of West Union, where I was raised. The occupants of the bus noticed on nearby Shannon's Knob that a UFO was hovering directly over my family's home. Shannon's Knob was the hillside I grew up on and the highest point in the town. A woman who was a passenger on the bus called my parents to tell them about the spacecraft suspended over our home, but my parents were disbelieving. The following spring, my friend Regina Ball and I were playing on the hillside above my family's house. At the peak of Shannon's Knob was the entire power source for the town of West Union. As Jeannie and I played, we suddenly heard men's voices. Turning, we saw 2 men dressed in black near the rise above us. We were frolicking near the bushes, but when we noticed the men in black, we became scared and hid. We watched silently as the 2 men measured a spot on the hillside. The men exuded an uncanny energy, which I immediately sensed. They also looked differently from each other. One man appeared to be of European descent, while the other one had an East Asian appearance. The one with the Asian appearance had what looked to be dyed blonde hair that was cut very short. Neither was wearing a hat, nor did they wear a suit and tie. They simply had on a black shirt and black pants. The men seemed interested only in the landscape and spoke to each other in low tones. Jeannie and I spied on the 2 men until they left. There was no vehicle anywhere close. Where they came from, we didn't know. Jeannie and I went home and forgot all about them. In years to come, we would both suffer from migraine headaches and just overall poor health. We never linked the men in black up on the hill with our headaches. I later learned Darren Berger suffered from severe headaches, as did his daughter. A few days later, some boys were playing on the same hillside. The boys noticed a circular impression in the grass that was about 15 to 20 feet wide in a treeless area of Shannon's Knob. They went home and reported it to their parents. My brother came home from school relaying the story from his friend. In my child's mind, I made the connection. It was almost like a secret that only I was privy to. To my knowledge, no one ever followed up on the circular impression on Shannon's Knob, nor the UFO sighting over our house. In the winter and spring of 1967, when my grandfather was hit and killed by a train, and we witnessed the men in black up on Shannon's Knob, we had other bizarre happenings. Our home became an epicenter for poltergeist activity. Ceramic birds flew off of our living room mantel. Pictures fell off the walls. A heavy iron was tossed from my bedroom into the bedroom of my parents and slid under the bed where my dad was sleeping. But nothing was quite as strange as the footsteps I heard walking on the roof at night. This was the winter of 1967, and for the most part, appearances of the footsteps went on for as long as up until 1970, so 3 years. On certain nights around 2 a.m., a loud bang would punctuate the stillness of my bedroom. It originated from the roof above me. It sounded like someone had jumped out of a helicopter onto our roof with a boom. There would be a pause of a few moments, and then whoever or whatever it was began to walk on the roof. The roof would creak under the weight. If I would scream for my parents, which I did often, the footsteps would pause until it grew quiet again and they would start right back up. At first, my parents did not believe me. However, one morning, I heard them talking among themselves. My parents had heard the footsteps on the roof as well. I then began to sleepwalk. Sometimes I would wake up to hear the radio playing what sounded like a Catholic mass, but there were no active Catholic churches in my town. I reached over to turn the radio off and found that the radio wasn't even on. Then I would lie there and listen to a broadcast of an angel choir with no source for the music until the chords faded as the sun finally came up. One morning, I woke up in a different bedroom than my family never used, with a sheet pulled over my head like I was a dead person on a gurney ready to be taken to the morgue. As I stirred from sleep, I felt my skin had grown cold against the clammy air and realized every stitch of my clothing had been removed. I had no idea how I'd got there, nor why my clothes had been taken off of me. Embarrassed, I jumped from the bare bed, put my clothes on, and never told a soul. My parents were sleeping normally in their room. I was 7 years old. Perhaps the strangest tale of all was one about our house more than a decade before we had moved in. A young woman was babysitting at what would later be our home. She thought she heard something attempting to climb up the side wall of the house. Too frightened to go check for herself, the girl called the West Union City Police. When the cops came to check the house, they were shocked when their flashlights shone up the side of the wall. There were muddy footprints traveling up the side of the house. Whether they were human or something else, that part I don't know. From then on, our house became known as the one that was haunted in town. But by what? End quote. This is a lot to unpack here, guys. She's obviously had several experiences with supernatural creatures, poltergeists. I mean, like I said, she had talked about in another article or a book or something like that, an experience with Indrid Cold / the Grinning Man. So she's probably someone with different abilities, or at least one ability that she either really doesn't understand yet, like understand how to use it, work with it, and what it all means. I mean, it is very confusing, but I can say one thing. The one thing that I do see a lot where I live is shadow beings jumping from roof to roof. And I see this all around. Like, I'm not usually out at night, but when I am, this is what I will see in the town that I live in. Most of you know I live in a haunted house, but the thing on the roof, the hearing of the footsteps and the jumping on the roof really kind of triggered those memories for me, and I get creeped out because that's the exact same thing that I deal with here. Otherwise, I'm basically left alone in the house, but that is one thing that, you know, I understand how terrifying that can be. I wanted to try to move away, even just for a few moments, from high strangeness and extraterrestrials, and perhaps cover something paranormal, otherworldly, supernatural, etc. However, I'm finding that a bit difficult, as I don't want to broaden the definition I have in my head of what constitutes as high strangeness, and instead of witness accounts at the very least, I am simply coming up empty except for urban legends and things like that. So I'll have a part 6 to this, I'm sure, and I'll do my best to find something outside of UFOs. But again, we don't want to get into too much rumor, legend, speculation. Well, I guess legend's okay. Rumor and speculation are not. When it comes to high strangeness, witness accounts, whether you believe them or not, are what I'm looking for, right? And I am working on the listener encounters finally as well. Thank you guys for that. So for now, let's look into a file from MUFON. A man back in the year 2000 moved into his dream home with his wife and young children in Whittier, California. He says he came home from work late one night and his wife and kids were sleeping. It was around 11 p.m., so he sat down on the couch to watch some television and unwind a bit before going to bed himself. The house was dark except for the light of the TV, and he was soon dozing off right there on the couch. As soon as he began to fall asleep, though, he was startled awake by what sounded like the rustling of a potato chip bag or something similar coming from his kitchen. He was a bit startled because he knew he was the only one awake at that time. I'll let him explain it in his own words, as he stated, quote, "The noise caught me off guard because I was the only person awake in the house. From my chair, I could look down the hallway to the bedrooms and would have seen if anyone had gotten out of bed and walked to the kitchen. Besides, the kids at that age never woke up after falling asleep, and if they had stirred awake, I would have heard them get out of their beds, and they surely would have called out for me or my wife. My view of said hallway was unimpeded, and from my sitting position in the living room was directly at my 11 o'clock. My heart raced as I knew none of my family members were actually in the kitchen. I became even more alarmed as the rustling lasted a very long 5 to 6 seconds. I was in total belief that someone was in our kitchen. The noise was clear, slow, and deliberate, and there was no doubt that it was coming from inside our home and specifically from our kitchen. I was frozen. I blurted out, 'Who's up?' for some reason, but there was no answer. The rustling immediately stopped, I assumed as a reaction to my verbalization. I was certain someone was in our home as my senses went wild. My hair on the back of my neck and arms stood up, and I felt a burning sensation down my spine. End quote. He goes on to say that at this point he was pretty much convinced that there was someone in the home and therefore went in search of some sort of weapon. As he walked into another room, the lights in both the kitchen and laundry room went completely dark. I will say, and this is just kind of an aside, that from the very beginning, he had kind of gone out of his way to, as I've reiterated to you guys, to say that the lights in the house were off except for what was coming from the TV. But he could have turned the lights on while walking through and looking for the weapon. As these lights in the room went off simultaneously, his thoughts raced, and he even considered that the intruder had now somehow cut the power to the home, but then quickly realized the TV was still glowing bright with whatever he had previously been dozing off to. So none of the light, all the lights flicked off. I guess as he flicked them on, that would make sense, but the TV wasn't off. So it couldn't have been a complete disruption or cutting of the electricity. So this guy slowly made his way to the kitchen, and as he walked, he took his belt off in order to try to use the buckle, like by swinging it, figuring once he got to the kitchen, he would just have to find a way to get to a knife to get to this intruder that he was convinced was there. He said, though, that once he made it to the kitchen, he saw there was no one there, and apparently with the way the home was set up, if there was someone in the kitchen, they would have had to have passed him in order to leave the room. And he said there was really nowhere that they could be, hiding. He looked in the laundry room, but also found no one there. He said he realized he would have to search the house room by room. He grabbed a large knife and went first to his children's bedrooms, only to find them soundly sleeping, which was, I'm sure a relief. Next, he went to the master bedroom to check on his wife, who he assumed was also sleeping. Here is what he said happened next. Quote, "My wife, who had been asleep during the entire incident to this point, was oddly sitting upright on her side of the bed. I did not notice if she had been sitting up as I entered the master bath seconds prior. Nevertheless, she was sitting erect, and this caused me to stop my gait immediately. I was now 1 foot past the master bath threshold, standing in my bedroom, once again approximately 9 feet away from the foot of the bed. She then whispered in a perturbed tone, 'Why were you standing over me?' Remaining still, I responded, 'I just walked into the room. I wasn't standing over you.' She then replied, whispering and even more upset, 'Someone was standing at the foot of our bed looking down at me. It woke me up. I know what I saw.' My heart raced again as I placed my index finger of my right hand to my lips, urging her to please be quiet. I cleared out our bedroom as my wife sat in the bed with the blankets up to her nose. The master bedroom was now clear. The only place the intruder could be is in the last room of the house, the office. I shushed my wife again, not having time to share all that had transpired, and deliberately set out to then clear the office." End quote. The office also turned up no intruders. He then told his wife to come back with him into the living room. The TV was now off and the rest of the house was still dark as well, with the switches to the lights having no effect and still not working. So they're walking through the house trying to flick on lights. None of the switches are turning any of the lights on. They're not working, and now the TV is out. So it's pitch black in the house. He explained to his wife what was going on and what he had heard up until that point, and asked her more about the figure she had said she had seen standing over the bed. All she would, or maybe all she could say, was that the figure was, quote, "a tall, dark figure," end quote, and that she had thought it was him. He began to light candles, but once again was also trying to understand what was going on with the electricity. The street lights outside seemed to be working just fine, and some of the lights in the neighbors' homes were on. The power did seem to have been cut, but now he was forced to face the question, by what and or by whom? He continued on telling his story by saying, quote, "I opened the front door and walked out onto our porch. I had a strange heavy feeling on my chest and felt very uneasy. I found this to be odd as I had calmed down completely from the earlier night events. As soon as I exited our front door, I felt anxious and edgy for some reason. I noticed that the power was out on all of the residences on our side of the street, the north side as it were. There were no porch lights on our side of the street, and that was not the norm. I came back in the house and told my wife that I was going to take a walk up the street to see if the power to the residences north of us was out. She went ballistic. She told me under no uncertain terms that she did not want me to leave her and the kids alone in the house, especially after the events I had told her that had transpired just moments earlier. She grabbed my right arm and begged me to stay in the house with her. I would not be denied. It was almost as if I was compelled to go outside and take a look around. I felt like I was being drawn to investigate the night's activities further. What happened next was unbelievable, end quote. Once he had gotten to the corner on the end of his street, he says he was struck with an overwhelming sense of panic and doom. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up again, and he knew danger was afoot on the otherwise quiet and deserted, normally very safe street. He said he was terrified but didn't understand and couldn't put his finger on why he was feeling this way and feeling it so intensely. He saw nothing up ahead or around him, and so decided he better get back to the house to be with his wife and kids and make sure that they were still safe. As he turned to make his way back, though, he claims that the entire street was suddenly and very brightly lit by some intense overhead light. He said the light was definitely above the trees and, according to our witness, was moving in a southern direction and coming from the mountains. He couldn't tell, though, the actual height of the light source or what it was. He said it was just way too bright. He went on to say, quote, "The light continued to move slowly southbound at what appeared to be approximately 5 to 7 miles per hour at best. The light was now directly over the middle of the street, and the light beams continued to shine through the tree's branches down onto the street. I remember looking down at the street again to marvel at the brightness of said light. I took several steps forward, keeping the light source in my vision at all times. I found myself not under the protection of the trees any longer. I was now in an open space in the middle of the street, almost directly in front of my house. The residence directly across the street does not have a ficus tree in the front yard, and this allows an unimpaired view of the sky looking southbound. The light source was now more or less over the house directly across the street from my residence. There was no sound emitting from the slow-moving light source, no chopping of blades such as you would hear with a helicopter. There was no jet engine or propulsion noise present. There were no green or red aviation flight lights present either. The light source was too low to the ground to be any craft I have ever seen. Suddenly, the light accelerated forward in parallel to a speed I can only describe as 10 to 15 times faster than that of a meteor racing downward and across the sky, heading into our atmosphere. The light source traveled an immense length of airspace in less than 1 second. If I had to estimate the distance it traveled, I would have to say approximately 30 to 40 miles in the previously described 1 second of time. At the time of its parallel acceleration, not a sound was emitted from the light source. It remained absolutely silent in its forward motion, and the light became smaller in size almost instantly. The light source size was that of a grape from the position I continued to observe it from. Then the light source took a vertical trajectory comparable to a child sliding up, not down the slide. The light source during this upward trajectory increased speed and was traveling even faster than it had during its initial parallel acceleration. The size of the light source at its last visible observation as it turned upward was now that of a small pea. Suddenly it was gone, simply disappearing out of sight and what I believe to be out of our atmosphere, end quote. That was a lot to unpack. This witness was stunned and had no idea what to think besides being struck with the overwhelming idea that he needed to get back to his home, to his wife and small children as quickly as possible, and that's exactly what he did. He burst through the front door and started explaining to his wife what he had just witnessed, and as he did, within a mere minute or two, they both jumped when all of the lights in not only their home, but on their entire side of the street, where everything had been previously out, had suddenly and all at once flicked back on. The TV went back on almost at full blast, which it hadn't been that loud before it had gone out, because remember, he had been watching it and trying to fall asleep or falling asleep. Though he doesn't know exactly what it was he and his family were up against that night, he is convinced it was a UFO he had seen outside, and he wholeheartedly believes that one or more of the occupants of the craft were creeping around his house for whatever reason. He's sure he doesn't know. I'm sure I don't either. What do you guys think was actually going on here? Do you think maybe the kids were abducted or somebody in the house was abducted? They were, what slash and or whoever it was seemed to be observing the wife. Think about it, you know, a tall shadow figure. If you got my new book, you'll hear all about how they stand at the foot of the bed. But what do shadow figures have to do with extraterrestrials? You know, there are a lot of people constantly trying to make that connection or see if there is a connection. I'm one of them. Was it a man in black? Was she given a screen memory of something that happened to her while the husband was distracted looking for this intruder? Maybe they were doing an examination on her. I would love to know more. I would love to know if he or anyone in his family ever recovered any abduction memories. I don't even have a name for this guy, so That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed spending this time with me, if you enjoyed the content, and if you just want to see me smile. Spread the love by sharing this video. In the description box, you will find important links, ways to donate to the channel, PayPal, Patreon, Cash App. Join my Patreon for $20 a month or more, and I will give you every single month as a thank you a free 7 to 12 card personal intuitive oracle reading. For more information on how to get a personal reading and what types I offer, also in the description box, my books on Amazon, Kindle and paperback version, Missing the Faith Theory, Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories, and my newest book, Shadow Entities, Sleep Paralysis and Beyond, all available at Amazon through the links in the description box. If you'd like autographed copies, or if you need information about really anything else, personal readings, whatever, email me anytime at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. There's information about the manifestation intention sprays, the spiritual helper boxes. I know a lot of you guys don't really understand what that's about yet, but the website, I keep saying it's coming soon, but it really is, okay? Anything worth doing is usually hard to do and usually takes time and effort, but I'm putting blood, sweat, tears, and everything I have into this business. So for those of you who have ordered even just a, small spray for $18.95, including shipping, I really do appreciate the business. This is how I'm trying to make a living. Those of you who have purchased readings, autographed copies, those of you who are buying the books, those of you who donate in any way, and those of you who just support me. Every Wednesday night, you find myself and Ghost Dragon ZW here from 7:30ish to 11:30ish p.m. Eastern Time. We do end if we run out of people to read for. Come on in and I will pull one random card from a random deck and give you a reading for the week. That's to bring people in to what I do for a living with readings, to get people acquainted with what it is and to show them that I am the real deal. I know what I'm doing and what I'm talking about. Thank you very much. And it's also a really great place to meet some amazing people who are also empathic and light workers and just beautiful souls who were so lost. But when we come together, we really come together. Monday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, we're doing a topic-based live stream. So I will choose a topic, or maybe sometimes I'll read a chapter from each book. My new article from Paranormal Press magazine has been out since October, but I just recently got my copy. They did such an amazing job. Go to theparanormalpressmagazine.com. It's issue 6 if you want to purchase that. My other issue, I'll try to leave links in the description box for those. All right, guys. My Amazon wish list gift link. Thank you so much for all of the Christmas holiday gifts, all of the just because gifts, guys. They mean so much to me, from the smallest to the biggest, just to be thought of by you guys. That wish list gift link has so many things on it, mainly decks and crystals, that type of stuff. So if you want to just send me a, hey, I was thinking of you gift, that's the way to do it. And it goes right through. That way I don't have to get my address out and all that other stuff. Email me if you need anything, if you have any questions. If you want to order anything until the website is out, it's kind of just word of mouth right now. But I'm telling you, everything I have goes into my creation. So hit me up on that. I'm probably forgetting something as always, but I will never forget to remind you to be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Always be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today you are capable, you are worth it, you are beautiful, you are perfectly made, you can do it. I believe in you. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.